story time with any Gina.
The Grey Reaches was a place of legend, an infamous stretch of road whose very name invoked feelings of unease. The locals in nearby villages avoided speaking of it, and those who had ventured too close often returned with tales that made little sense, words laced with fear, as if the road itself had taken a part of them, something intangible that could never be restored. I had first heard whispers of it from a man named Ben, a seasoned traveller, whose reputation for finding the world's hidden corners made him a subject of intrigue and admiration. But when Ben spoke of the Grey Reaches, his tone shifted, becoming thick with apprehension. He'd been in the tavern that night, nursing a mug of ale in silence, his gaze distant as the crackling fire reflected in his eyes. I was young, eager for any adventure, and had asked him perhaps too innocently about the strange places he'd visited. He had often regaled me with stories of ruined cities lost to time and roads forgotten by maps. But when I pressed him about the Grey Reaches, he simply stared into his drink, avoiding my question for what seemed like an eternity. There's a place, he finally muttered, where the world itself is wrong, where even the air feels like it's trying to choke you. I was young, but I had the instinct of a traveller myself, and I pressed him for more. That's what people say about it, he continued, still avoiding my eyes. It's not just a road. It's a thing, alive in ways no road should be. You'll hear voices, feel things watching you, but you can never be sure if it's real or just your mind playing tricks. And when you leave, well, not everyone leaves. My heart thudded in my chest. I tried to convince him to tell me more, but he waved me off with a brusque dismissal, muttering, "Some stories are better left untold. Trust me." That was the end of the conversation, but the seed had been planted. Over the following weeks, I couldn't shake the thought of the Grey Reaches. I spent hours at the tavern, asking others who had passed through the area, but none would speak of it directly. Some would merely shudder and change the subject, while others would offer cryptic warnings. "Don't go there. Better staying away, lad." The words lingered in my mind like the sound of distant thunder, each warning urging me to ignore the pull, but also heightening the mystery. I knew then I had to find it. I had set out one morning, my rucksack slung over my shoulder, with nothing but a map and a stubborn resolve. It took me 2 days to reach the village closest to the Grey Reaches, and the moment I arrived, I knew I was not welcome. The people here were a strange lot, suspicious, weathered as though time had worn them down. They avoided eye contact, their conversations lowered to mere murmurs as I passed. The innkeeper gave me a silent, knowing nod when I inquired about the road, but refused to speak more than a few words. "Best not walk that way, lad, best not." But I couldn't turn back. My curiosity burned too brightly, and the allure of discovering what lay hidden on that forsaken path was too strong to resist. So, with nothing more than vague directions and a sense of impending doom, I set out early the next morning. The Grey Reaches was not marked on any official map. It was an old, forgotten trail, overgrown with tangled brambles and wild grass. When I first glimpsed it from a distance, I thought perhaps I was mistaken. It didn't seem like a road at all, more like a forgotten footpath through the wilderness, barely wide enough to fit a single person. But as I drew closer, I noticed the faint outline of old stone markers, their surfaces once smoothed by centuries of rain and wind, standing as mute sentinels to some forgotten history. The air here felt heavier, like a weight pressing down on my chest. And then, there it was, the road. It appeared to stretch on forever, but as soon as I stepped onto it, something shifted. The atmosphere changed, the air growing unnaturally still. The path seemed to twist and turn in ways that didn't make sense. The trees that lined the road tall, dark, and dense loomed over me like ancient guardians, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch farther than the light should have allowed. The ground was uneven, the road cracked and broken, with sharp rocks jutting out at angles. But it was the silence that unsettled me the most. There were no birds, no insects, no rustling of leaves. It was as though the world itself had stopped breathing. I walked for hours, my boots crunching against the gravel, but the eerie quiet remained. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that invisible eyes were tracking my every movement. At times, I would hear faint noises, whispers just on the edge of my hearing, but when I tried to focus, there was nothing. No sound, no presence, just the oppressive silence pressing in on me. I pressed on, determined to see this through. As the day wore on, the sun seemed reluctant to shine, the light growing dim as though filtered through some unseen haze. I reached an old, withered signpost at the edge of the road. Its markings were faded beyond recognition, but the metal itself seemed unnaturally cold, even in the warmth of the day. I stood there for a long moment, contemplating whether to continue, but I felt compelled forward, an almost primal need to see what lay at the end of the road. The path grew steeper, and the woods around me thickened, the trees now so dense they blocked out what little light remained. The air grew colder, and I began to feel the first stirrings of unease creeping into my bones. There was something wrong about this place, something ancient that pulsed beneath the earth like a heartbeat, slow, steady, and relentless. And then it came, the first glimpse of someone, perhaps moving in the distance. A figure, humanoid but distorted, standing just beyond the reach of the trees. My heart pounded in my chest as I took a step forward, but when I blinked, the figure was gone. It hadn't moved. It had simply vanished. The road seemed to stretch endlessly before me now, and I was no longer sure how far I had come. Hours? Days? I couldn't tell. Every step felt like I was sinking deeper into the very earth itself, and the whispers grew louder, coalescing into words I couldn't quite understand. Every once in a while, I would glimpse shadows in the periphery of my vision, figures too fast, too fleeting to be real, yet somehow real enough to make my blood run cold. And then, just as the last remnants of light drained from the sky, I saw it. The end of the road, or rather, what appeared to be the end. It was a vast, open expanse, a cliff that dropped away into an abyss so dark I couldn't see the bottom. The ground trembled beneath my feet, and I knew, without a doubt, that this was no ordinary place. The shadows that danced at the edges of my vision became more pronounced, more tangible, as though the very fabric of reality was beginning to unravel. In the center of the expanse stood a figure tall, cloaked in tattered robes, its face hidden in darkness. It spoke, its voice echoing not in my ears, but directly in my mind. Why do you seek what you cannot understand? You walk on cursed ground. You will never leave. Not truly. I turned to flee, but the path was gone. The grey reaches had vanished behind me, leaving me standing alone in an empty void. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until I thought my mind would crack under the pressure. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of my own heartbeat, thundering in my ears, mingling with the whispers, until I could no longer tell where one began and the other ended. When I awoke, I was lying on the ground outside the village, the morning sun rising lazily in the sky. The road was gone. The grey reaches had vanished, as though it had never existed at all. But I knew better. I had felt it. I had seen it. And I was never truly the same after that. I returned to the village, shaken to my core. The locals looked at me as they had looked at all those who had gone before. They knew. They always knew. The grey reaches was not a road. It was a place between worlds, a doorway to something far darker. And those who dared to walk it would find their souls bound to it forever.
Thank you for watching. Please click on the subscribe button now if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet. Love from Storytime with Auntie Gina.